Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, has George Floyd's name become a metaphor for America's systemic racism? And why does Montgomery County trail the rest of the state in COVID reopenings? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by Maryland Young Republican National Committeeman Evan Young, Democratic attorney Ron Little, and political strategist Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. In the days and weeks since George Floyd's death, the nation has been convulsed by legitimate cries against systematic racism of America. And the country has been rocked by violence that were exploited by some during the protests. But the one constant theme was the need to shine a spotlight on racist police activity. And amid alternate calls to defund the police and those urging better training for police officers, we don't know exactly what to do. Susan, the Montgomery County Council, which earlier this year passed legislation addressing police reforms and social justice and racial equity, passed legislation to further eliminate excessive use of force by police. Now, given the county's leadership on these issues, is the county on the right path to guaranteeing social justice for all Montgomery County residents?
Well, I think we can all agree that Montgomery Countyans do want everyone to have justice. I think we all can say that we want accountability of police officers, and I think we can all say that Black Lives Matter. Moving from there, the legislation you talked about earlier about this accountability, the County Council is now seeking participants to be on this advisory commission. What they're going to be doing is studying the issue and making recommendations. As of today, we're taping on Thursday. There are new, it went in today that police officers now have to intervene if their fellow officers are doing something wrong. So that's a big step right now. The regulations you talked about of force, the hearings haven't been held on that, but it's going to happen, and pay attention if you want to give. And also, Council Member Tom Hucker is going to be introducing legislation shortly, how we need to incorporate mental health workers into work with police officers. Those are always good starts. The County Council, the County
question I have for you really is about how the county has been a leader on this issue.
We are. Well, that's what I'll
the last 20 years.
Well, it hasn't been, actually, and I was getting to that. Right now, all the players in effect are doing it. In the 90s, under the Clinton administration, there was a Get Tough movement. And during that time, Montgomery County moved away from community policing, and it became a more tough on crime, arrest people. You got credit if you got people arrested. That is changing. So one of the things that we definitely need in this county is a more multiracial police force. If we do all of these things, yes, we will be a leader. And we're very fortunate because in a lot of the issues, instances across the country, the police union is seen as obstructive. Not the case here. They were very supportive and leading the way on this effort as of today that police officers have to intervene. So I think we will be a leader soon, and as long as all of us get the right mindset that we all deserve justice. Amen.
Thank you, Susan. Ron, I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I was a teenager at the time. And I remember the marches, and I also remember the terrible aftermath here in Washington, D.C. after Martin Luther King was killed in 1968. What distinguishes the movement from the 60s to now is that there was a set of goals and principles that the civil rights movement was trying to achieve. This is more amorphous. This is defund the police. We want justice. We want to do away with racism. What is the Black community trying to accomplish through these protests other than expressing their tremendous grief over the death of George Floyd?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues at play here, many of which are vestiges of unaddressed concerns from the civil rights era. We still have pay and wage gap issues. We still have education gaps that haven't been addressed or not addressed sufficiently so that we can see some marginal enough increases so that we see an increase in students going to college and students being able to earn more and provide better for their families and maybe move out of or improve the communities that they exist in so that there's better health care, more investment in local small businesses. And the small businesses provide, I think, roughly 90% of the structure of overall wealth for this country. So an absence of that kind of resource in these communities contributes to other problems that need to be addressed. So it's not just the economic failures or the education failures or other financial failures like the inability to obtain loans to start businesses. We see roughly 45 to 46% of loan requests approved by banks. And it has nothing to do with anything except race and profitability and whether or not they see it as something that they want to stand behind in those communities. All of those things collectively create problems that just don't seem to go away.
So if I hear you correctly, and I've heard this from others, that we perhaps might not be talking about a race issue, but a class issue, that there's a class distinction between poor and less poor.
No, it's not a class issue. It's definitely a race issue. Even within the race, the class issue becomes non-existent. The basis upon which these decisions are made are based on race. No one is asking whether you're rich or you're poor. We see the same issues when people apply for jobs. More ethnic sounding names are less likely to get interviews, which creates other problems or piles on to the existing problems. This is definitely a race issue. The class issue will resolve itself once we see a greater investment in the community that helps us resolve some of the existing issues so that people feel better and more hopeful about their futures.
Okay. Evan, because of the nature of Floyd's death at the hand of police officer Derek Chauvin, most of the attention has been focused on the role of policing. And as you heard in Susan's comments just a moment ago, there is a divide as to the principles of how to police between community policing and the so-called broken glass police efforts that were implemented up in New York City and the stop and frisk that was implemented in New York City. What is the logical extension here? Governor Hogan has said that defunding the police is a terrible idea, but already we're hearing that Prince George's County and Baltimore City have already decided to take $20 million out of each of their budgets to repurpose them to other uses. Is it possible to reform the police by defunding the police?
You know, I've been hearing this defund the police, disband the police, this conversation go back and forth, and even people advocating for one, oftentimes I'm hearing them shift between the two of them because some things still exist. If you want to have greater training and greater education, greater accountability, more body cameras, better technology to monitor the police and report the ones that are not doing their job the way they're supposed to, you can't do that by stripping them of their budget. You need the resources to implement all of these things. There's been cases where people are talking about defund the police as in shifting that money towards more social workers or mental health professionals to deal with some of the nonviolent calls that police respond to. That's great if you want to implement those positions and put them onto the police force in some capacity, but certain realities still exist. When you send a social worker to a domestic dispute, you might very well just end up with a social worker also getting beat up and assaulted if that drunk, abusive ex-husband doesn't care what the social worker has to say. So I think there can be reforms made and have other types of professionals brought in to address some of these calls and some of these concerns. But you can't assume ahead of time that something seemingly minor or seemingly nonviolent will remain that way once you respond to it. So sending somebody who has no way to protect themselves or physically address a situation if it gets to that point is just going to be hurting them in the long run. And these laws still exist. Even if you don't have police there to enforce those minor laws, the laws are still on the books. So if people really want to address that, they should be addressing it legislatively and removing those laws.
So Ron, I'm going to go back to you, and because it kind of ties in with your earlier answer. National Public Radio pointed out 4 ways that racial inequality harms African-American school children. And it begins and ends with students of color being treated differently in the school system. Here in Montgomery County, MCPS is struggling with the issue of how to improve school performance and close the education gap between white and minority students. That was a topic certainly of the most recent Board of Education election that was held a couple of weeks ago. But it seems to come down to a funding issue. Is that all it is?
No, I think funding is a large part of the problem. We also need to focus on the quality of the teachers that we put into communities of color. We have to have people who are fully invested in making sure that there's parity across the board in terms of how we teach the children, what information that we are teaching the children, and the access to resources they have to learn. And I think part of what we've seen recently with COVID, and as we try to address how these kids were going to learn from afar, was limited resources for kids who didn't have computers at home or didn't have access to internet services needed to provide access to the learning portals that students needed to continue to learn. All of these things contribute equally to why there's this education gap.
Thank you. Susan, the county has just passed a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. And I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to define and what that means.
I will do my best to try to explain. Black and brown individuals, as we are all well aware, across the country are dying at a higher rate. And there are some disparities in their lives that are obvious, whether it's housing, life expectancy, health issues, achievement gaps. And based on like past history with their distrust, they don't necessarily get any health care. They have less insurance. They have poorer care. And there is something called the allostatic load. And in that, the stress that is on their life, their whole life, that leads to mental health issues and high blood pressure, meaning being followed by the cops on a regular basis, being trailed in department stores because it's assumed they're going to get hit for shoplifting, people making snide comments as they walk by, actually avoiding them and walking across the street, microaggression. All of these things add up within the Black and brown communities so that there is health disparity. And until we start addressing the whole issue, and in the county, to follow up on what Evan said, in this county, the first thing that goes are health and human services, recreation, libraries, housing, the things we need to address all of these issues. And we have to look at a holistic effort. And if we start there, admitting there's a problem and start working at it, we're going to have a chance of getting to it.
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you for that enlightening explanation. You know, one of the things that we have to recognize also in talking about the police is the difficulty of the job and also the necessity of the job. A recent event that comes to mind is taken from California, where a young protester for Black Lives Matter was protesting, and during the protest, her child swallowed a coin. The first person she went to was a police officer for help and for aid, and they were able to revive the child by clearing the airwaves. So I'm so sorry that the communities are being divided against one another, and I like to see that we have a more coming together in the future. We have to take a hard break here. When we come back from this short break, why does Montgomery County continue to trail not only the state, but most of the United States in reopening our businesses from COVID-19? Stay tuned. And welcome back. For weeks since the announcement of the Phase 1 reopening, which didn't go quite so well for County Executive Mark Elrich, he's been under pressure to reopen Montgomery County businesses sooner rather than later. This week, the County Council criticized his Phase 2 reopening guidance, stating the need for greater clarity. Evan, how successful has the county been regarding the reopening of our businesses here in Montgomery County?
Well, I think many of us would like to see things get back to normal sooner than later. Last time I was on, we were talking about, we're to the point now, you can't just shut down the world and the economy for a quarter of the year, especially if there's talk of maybe a second wave coming later this year. You can't just shut everything down for months on end every time there is a disease out there that most people recover from just fine. So how successful is the reopening? I think some of that will depend on how many businesses can come back and how quickly they can come back, and how many may be lost for good because of the time they've been shut down. But I think we're well into the point now where if you are in that population that is higher risk, or you have underlying health conditions, or you're older, you should continue to take extra precautions and stay home and telework and have someone else run errands for you if all possible. But I'm 31, I'm perfectly healthy. There's no reason why I cannot go out and conduct my life as normal now, especially when we're seeing in Ocean City, the beaches are packed, but here, I can't go to the gym yet and be the only person in the gym exercising. It is a very big hypocritical difference there. We've seen protests, which of course you have your First Amendment right to do so, but Mark Elrich was not breaking up those mass gatherings, people exercising their First Amendment right. So I think we need to get to the point now where if you are comfortable going out and conducting business, if you're a business owner, comfortable having business done at your place of business, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, continue to take precautions.
That's the Texas method. It's your responsibility, and we're not going to police it.
Adults taking personal responsibility. I know it's a foreign concept to some, but if we're talking about a world of freedoms, you should be able to be free to, as an adult, make decisions for yourself.
Even if they're stupid, right?
Susan,
business
in general, you can vote Democrat.
Reopen sooner. And some of the guidelines, as Evans was alluding to, don't seem quite reasonable. I mean, we all know that in the restaurant and hospitality industry, the margins are very slim. And after 4 months of not being open, how are restaurants going to be profitable at 50% or less?
This is all a timed issue. And I want to add, we are behind DC in terms of opening. And the DC, Maryland, and Virginia were doing.
We're not behind Florida. We're not behind Arkansas. I mean, come on.
Oh, give me a break and look at their list. Their numbers now are going through the roof. They're going through the roof. So this county followed the state too, said they were going to follow the CDC guidelines. The state waffled on it a bit, but with the advice of the CDC, the state, the county's health advisor, we are now going into stage 2 as of tomorrow. That was based on the health outcomes, which is called the county dash, testing and tracing. It is far better to be safe than sorry. And I will tell you, 2/3 of the members of the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce were open the whole time. They've been open the whole time. They're working. So I think that when you are the county that has the most
underscores the whole point, Susan, is that what business is essential and what business is non-essential. Every business
is essential to the person that owns it.
Business. And
you're right, but you know what? We are this
who would be open and who wouldn't be open.
Well, we are the county.
My law firm has been open ever since the beginning of this thing. But I can tell you that there's no difference in our operations other than a greater level of sanitary condition and being mindful of
But
how we behave.
restaurants are different, and that's, Casey, we had the most deaths of any place else in the state. And the county.
The largest county in the state.
No, well, I don't know. And the thing is that restaurants that are opening up, people aren't necessarily wanting to go there in other areas. People are cautious. And you've got to
go back to the point I just made with Evan, which is it's every individual's responsibility to determine what level of risk they're willing to take. And you're going to find a lot of people who aren't willing to take any, and then you're going to find people who are willing to take more.
But the people who are going to take more are going to hurt people who are following the guidelines. And I think that the majority of Montgomery Countyans are very happy with the level that we've been going. And tomorrow we'll find out. Since we're taking
barber, you ask the nail salon people, you ask the people who don't understand why they've been shut down.
Barbers are open. Hairdressers are open.
As of
yes,
now.
They are open now. They can serve certain clients already. And tomorrow they can.
You're lucky. I'm giving you the last word. We're wrapping it up. Stay tuned for parting shots. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Susan Heltemes.
I would like to wish all the fathers out there in our viewership to have a very, very happy Father's Day. Have a safe day and enjoy it as best you can. And I also want to note, as we go into the second phase this weekend, remember social distancing, wear your mask, wash your hands. Those things are going to make a difference. And in the states we're seeing really bad second spikes. People are not following those simple things. Wear your mask. It makes a difference. And the one thing, if you run into a nurse or a doctor, they have their masks on. They know something.
Thank you, Susan. Evan, your parting shot.
So just a little friendly advice for everyone out there. Don't let yourself be lectured to by people who are doing less than you. Over the last number of weeks, I've seen on social media a lot of people suddenly posting little black squares on their Facebook profile to show that they support equality and support Black Lives Matter. They've been posting little helpful infographics to explain to me how I'm racist and I'm just too stupid to understand. Yet, interestingly enough, any of the numerous times that I've gone into neighborhoods that are full of people who do not look like me and supported them and done things and spent my time helping them, none of these people asked me how they could get involved and help out next time. Because unlike them, Black Lives Matter to me all year, not just when the internet tells me they should.
Thank you, Evan. Ron Little, your parting shot. You're up for the very first time. Don't blow it, man.
My parting shot, I have two actually. My very first one is a shout out to the Supreme Court for their ruling today on DACA, and that the president overstepped his bounds and had no right to end the program. My second parting shot is to say thank you to all of the healthcare workers who are out there on the front lines every day, risking their lives to help secure our public health. And within that group, the United States Public Health Service often gets overlooked. Those people are on the front lines every day, oftentimes the very first group to meet our troubles head on. So thank you all very much for your efforts and your willingness to sacrifice for all of us.
Thank you, Ron. I want to thank you for appearing on the show this evening, your very first appearance. Appreciate your contribution. And I also want to thank all of the panel, of course, for being here each and every week for Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. But most importantly, on this particular weekend, I want to thank my wife, Nancy. 44 years ago, we got married on June 19th. And I want to thank her for putting up with me for all of that length of time. And I hope we have many more years together. For 21 this week, I want to thank all the viewers to keep watching Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show.